Black Star Network is here.
Hold no punches.
I'm real revolutionary right now.
Support this man, Black Media. He makes sure that our stories are told.
I
Thank you for being the voice of Black America, Roland.
Stay black. I love y'all.
All momentum we have now, we have to keep this going.
The video looks phenomenal.
See, there's a difference between Black Star Network and Black-owned media and something like CNN.
You can't be Black-owned media and be scared.
It's time to be smart.
Bring your eyeballs home.
You dig? Today is January 10, 2024, coming up on Roland Martin Unfiltered, streaming live on the Black Star Network. Woo, Republicans are pissed off. Hunter Biden strolled into today's committee hearing. They were angry and upset, but they did not call him to testify. Wait till we show you the various fiery exchanges. Also, Virginia got its first Black Speaker of the House today when Don Scott was sworn in. He's only the second African-American to be the Speaker of the House in the South. A federal appeals court says Florida Governor Ron DeSantis violated the First Amendment of removing state prosecutor Andrew Warren in 2022. Plus, North Carolina man who spent 44 years in prison for a rape he did not commit settles with the state and the city of Concord for $25 million. Plus, I talked with the author of a book called Blackball, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, Spencer Haywood, and the generation that saved the soul of the NBA. It's a conversation you do not want to miss. It's time to bring the funk. Roland Martin Unfiltered with Black Star Network. Let's go.
He's got it. Whatever the biz, he's on it. Whatever it is, he's got the scoop, the fact, the find. And when it breaks, he's right on time and it's rolling. Best believe he's knowing. Putting it down from sports to news to politics. With entertainment just for kicks, he's rolling.
Lord, the House was on fire today when they had the Judiciary Committee to consider holding Hunter Biden in contempt. Well, guess what? Hunter Biden decided to stroll into the actual committee room. Man, Republicans were angry and upset, mad as all get out at this. Of course, they have wanted him to testify, but they first wanted him to testify in private with the deposition and then go public. He said, no, I will testify publicly. Well, they don't want that. They want it to be private first and then come in. And boy, it got ugly. Even crazy in the rain, South Carolina Congresswoman Nancy Mace, she was really upset. And did she actually use white privilege? Listen to this.
Chairman Comer. First of all, my first question is, who brought Hunter Biden to be here today? That's my first question. Second question, you are the epitome of white privilege, coming into the Oversight Committee, spitting in our face, ignoring a congressional subpoena to be deposed. What are you afraid of? You have no balls to come up here and...
Mr. Chairman, point of inquiry.
Mr. Chairman,
if the gentlelady wants to hear from Hunter Biden, we can hear from him right now, Mr. Chairman. Let's take a vote and hear from Hunter Biden. What are you afraid of?
Hold on. Order.
Are women allowed to speak in here or no? Are women allowed to speak in here or no? Could you keep interrupting me?
I'll interrupt the chairman. I don't know that he's a lady.
I think that that Hunter Biden should be arrested right here, right now, and go straight to jail. Our nation is founded on the rule of law.
Come on.
And the premise that the law applies to...
Oh, you say let's send Hunter Biden to jail, yet Congressman Jim Jordan is sitting his ass right there. He has ignored a subpoena for 608 days, but you don't want him to go to jail. Okay, got it. Well, you heard Congressman Moskowitz there, Jared Moskowitz, who was interrupting her. Here's also some of what he had to say.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's good to see you after a long break. So I'm listening to the gentlelady from South Carolina about the witness being afraid to come in front of the committee. It's interesting. He's here. He doesn't seem to be too afraid. In fact, for some reason, the chairman, who on multiple occasions invited the witness to come on TV, apparently the chairman wants to pretend like his statements on television or in interviews don't matter, but it didn't happen once, it didn't happen twice, it happened multiple times. The chairman said the witness can choose whether to come to a deposition or to a public hearing in front of the committee. The witness accepted the chairman's invitation. It just so happens the witness is here. If the committee wants to hear from the witness and the chairman gave the witness that option, then the only folks that are afraid to hear from the witness with the American people watching are my friends on the other side of the aisle. I don't know if there's a proper motion.
All right, y'all. Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett of Texas, she really laid into the Republicans.
We love the Constitution today, and we also want to talk about foreign money coming in. Have y'all seen the report that was just produced where this chairman decided that he was going to block this committee from receiving additional information about y'all's guy, Trump, and all the money that he took? From what we did receive, we know that Trump got almost $6 million that we can account for, and we know that there's more there. From China specifically, we found almost $8 million total that he accepted from foreign governments while he was serving as the president of these United States. But we're concerned about the president's son who has not been involved in his administration. I just want to run it back, though, to the very beginning, because this is something that I just can't get over. I can't get over the gentle lady from South Carolina talking about white privilege. It was a spit in the face, at least of mine as a black woman, for you to talk about what white privilege looks like, especially from that side of the aisle. And let me quote your now ousted speaker and what he had to say about the Republican Party and y'all's lack of diversity. When you look at the Democrats, they actually look like America. When I look at my party, we look like the most restrictive country club in America. So let me tell you something. Y'all don't know what white privilege looks like, but I'm gonna show you a little bit of something. You see, you want to talk about a two-tier justice system, and this is the only time that y'all have ever referenced it, when this country has a history when it comes to black and brown folk of having two separate sets of rules. And right now what you want to do is have two separate sets of rules because Mr. Moskowitz offered y'all a fair situation. He said he would vote for Hunter to be held in contempt if y'all voted to hold all, even if you remove all of the members of Congress. There's still other people that y'all haven't decided that y'all have excuses for, but y'all don't want to hold them in contempt. But for some reason, it makes sense to hold Hunter Biden in contempt, who has tried to comply. And let me tell you why nobody wants to talk to y'all behind closed doors, because y'all lie. That's just the bottom line. You have done it thus far in this investigation. You have done it this far as it relates to this committee. In every single hearing, y'all spin, spin, spin. I don't know how y'all are still standing right now because you should be quite dizzy from all the spinning that you're constantly doing when it comes to spinning the truth. You talk about free and fair elections, but you back a guy who we know tried to steal the election. And this isn't about what Democrats have to say. Let me remind you, for those of you that don't know how the justice system works, it's not a matter of the president went in and indicted Trump, but we are talking about grand juries. Grand juries are comprised of American citizens, and the people that have entered pleas of guilty that will be flipping on your leader in a minute, they are Republicans. I do want to point that out. And half of them were Republicans that were handpicked by Donald Trump himself. So, to be clear, whatever happens to your little leader, it's going to be because of the actions that he took. So you can talk all you want to about how January 6th was nonsense, but all of y'all were running at that time. Y'all were grabbing y'all's gas masks and y'all were running to your offices because you didn't know if they were coming to kill you. You should have cared that somebody was there to protect you, but instead you want to play games because you found out that it was your leader that decided that he wanted to propagate an insurrection on our country. So don't tell me that you care about the Constitution, because you don't. All you care about is Trump getting reelected, and I'll yield the last of my time to my leader.
Thank you very much, Ms. Crockett, for your eloquent and powerful and irrefutable...
Now, the House Judiciary Committee did vote to formally recommend the full House hold Hunter Biden in contempt of Congress for defying a subpoena in the Republican impeachment inquiry into his father. Robert Patillo is host of People, Passion, Politics, WAOK 1380 out of Atlanta. Glad to have Robert on the show. Also on the show, we have Rebecca Carruthers, VP for Fair Election Center out of D.C., Tarun Walker, founder of Context Media. I got a kick out of the whole deal, all the drama. I really loved, Rebecca, when Marjorie Taylor Greene was time for her to speak. That's when Hunter and his people decided to walk out. Boy, did she get all mad, upset. They look like idiots. You can't keep yelling, testify, 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 and he's sitting right there, but they wouldn't call him.
Just clowns. They're not there for any serious work of the country. They're there to score political points. And even to see what they yelled at Hunter Biden in the hallway, I believe someone yelled at him, "When's the last time you've taken crack, Hunter?" I mean, just pure stupidity. You know, there's so much that's going on in this country where we actually need real leadership. There are many issues of national importance that the Congress could be working on, but these people don't care. They'd rather just be on the Hill and play games. But you know what? When they play foolish games, they're going to get foolish prizes come November 2024.
Robert, to see people complain about him not testifying, but he's sitting right there. Oh, no, no, no. The rules are you must testify in private first, do a deposition first. First of all, the moment he is sworn in, if he lies, whether public or in the deposition, that's perjury. Now, what they want to do is do a private deposition, leak selective comments from the deposition before there be a public one. We already know what this game is.
Of course, and Hunter Biden, people forget that outside of the addiction issues, he's a Ivy League educated attorney who knows how these games are played. I think this was best put by our friend Pastor Darrell Scott, former pastor for President Trump, of his African American Advisory Board. Darrell Scott tweeted out, Hunter Biden showed up in Congress, unzipped his pants, pulled himself out, waved it around, gave all the Republicans the middle finger, and walked out, sucking all the air out of the room. I'm not on Hunter's side, but that was a G move right there. Even Republicans realize that the House Republicans are making absolute idiots out of themselves, and they've done this every single time they've done one of these Hunter Biden hearings. And the truth is that this is being driven by the far right wing of the Freedom Caucus and the Republican Party. This, not even a majority of Republicans agree with going down this line of questioning, because this takes attention off of President Biden and reminds people how ridiculous the Republicans are. Right now, the Republicans are opposing Mike Johnson, MAGA Mike, the hand-picked conservative Speaker of the House, because he cut almost the exact same deal with Schumer and President Biden to keep the government open. And now even Matt Gaetz and other Freedom Caucus members are going to have to decide whether or not they're going to fund the government or have another recall petition and potentially not have a Speaker of the House again. This is all, as Rebecca said, on the backdrop of 25,000 dead Palestinians. And we're debating whether or not we're going to send aid to humanitarian aid to help those people. On the backdrop of 500,000 dead Ukrainians, and we're debating whether or not we're going to send additional funds to try to bring it into that conflict. Republicans love talking about the issues at the southern border. President Biden requested $13.6 billion in October to deal with the issues at the southern border. That hasn't gotten a vote yet by Republicans in the House of Representatives, and they've not even negotiated on that, despite the Senate staying in session to negotiate on that. But what they have done is vote for $886 billion military budget for the defense authorization. So the Republicans are showing themselves to not be a serious governing party, and every day this turns into an episode of House of Cards. I remind people that entire genre of television is gone now, because Republicans are so ridiculous. There's nothing that Shonda Rhimes can write that will be more ridiculous than this. There's nothing that Veep can write that will be crazier than this. There's nothing that House of Cards or the West Wing could write that would be more ridiculous than what's going on in Congress right now. So we had to replace all those shows with reality shows, because there's a reality show in Congress led by the host of The Apprentice. What did they expect to happen when they turned their entire party into a clown show?
Let's be clear, Torun. You can't sit here and whine and complain about Hunter Biden ignoring a subpoena when you literally have Republicans sitting in the room who did the exact same thing.
That's true, but we also have to look at it from the perspective of a voter. The average voter, especially the average working class voter, all they see is a political circus. They say what Kendrick Lamar like to call Democrats and Republicans, where you see two different factions gangbanging. And while we can debate the merits of this indictment, we can debate the merits of even discussing this. If you look at the way this has been discussed, it really is ridiculous. It seems like something like the last brother said out of either a comedy or some sort of dramatic show. But this is actually real life, and no real screenwriter would put this out in front of the public because they wouldn't believe it. Unfortunately, what the public is going to see, they're going to see people who they perceive as having privilege being able to walk into Congress and walk back out with no real consequences, even though there's already been several deals on the table that have either been refused because of the reasons you say, or because either the Republicans won't accept it or the Democrats won't accept it. But at the end of the day, when somebody is working 9 to 5 and they go into the voting booth and all they have to go on is seeing what how people move in these situations, and the conversation doesn't really seem serious, and it seems like a lot of backbiting, and it seems like a lot of tit for tat, that's going to have real effect at the voting place. And that's what I think the fear is from a lot of Democrats and Republicans. I think this has to be taken more seriously, and it has to be conducted in a business-like manner. Otherwise, it's just going to make the whole entire country look ridiculous.
Yeah, but the bottom line is this here. Republicans, they control the House, pure and simple. And they pass the fewest number of bills we have seen in decades. There's utterly dysfunction. And now they're blocking the spending bill because they are ticked off as Speaker of the House Mike Johnson. So if I'm the Democrats, I'm going to sit back and let these fools show their asses, because they're the ones who are in charge. And so they can't even get their act together. They can't even pass bills on their side of the House because the Freedom Caucus, the Conservative Freedom Caucus, is holding the entire caucus hostage. So trust me, we're about to see more drama. Robert, real quick, 20 seconds.
Just real quick. Also, Nancy Mace and Marjorie Taylor Greene talking about white privilege, talking about can women speak, saying that Hunter Biden is a misogynist because he's afraid of listening to women. It's the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard, because this is the party that's completely against quote unquote identity politics, right, until it's convenient for them, and then they can use it.
Absolutely. And it's white privilege that they are all actually actually in power. All right, folks, hold tight 1 second. We come back. Virginia. We see the first black Speaker of the House in Virginia history. We'll show you next. Roland Martin Unfiltered on the Black Star Network.
A new year for a new you. Curl Prep Natural Hair Solutions at curlprep.com is an amazing organic line for curls, locks, braids, twists, and even those wigs and extensions. Women, men, and children are loving this line. Look at this video and you be the judge. People line up to see this product in action at hair shows, and when they take a seat and try it, they don't believe it's their hair. Buy the products at curlprep.com. It works on all hair types. Use code ROLAND, that's ROLAND, lowercase letters, to get a 15% discount. Parents, remove the ouch. You will love this system because you can comb the product through your child's hair with your fingers. Seasoned saints are loving the product. It's all at curlprep.com. Use code ROLAND, lowercase letters, to get a 15% discount. You won't believe it's your hair.
Give me that bass, give me that beat. Hit on your
Marie Payton, voice of Sugar Mama on Disney's Louder and Prouder Disney Plus, and I'm with Roland Martin on Unfiltered.
Speaker-designee Scott, are you prepared to take the oath of office?
I am.
Please raise your right hand and place your left hand on the Bible. Please repeat after me. I, Don Scott.
I, Don Scott.
Do solemnly swear.
Do solemnly swear.
That I will support the Constitution of the United States.
That I will support the Constitution of the United States.
And the Constitution of the Commonwealth of Virginia.
And the Constitution of the Commonwealth of Virginia.
And that I will faithfully and impartially discharge.
And I will faithfully and impartially discharge.
All the duties incumbent upon me.
All the duties incumbent upon me.
As Speaker of the Virginia House of Delegates.
As Speaker of the Virginia House of Delegates.
According to the best of my ability.
According to the best of my ability.
So help me God.
So help me God.
Congratulations, Mr. Speaker.
History made in Virginia today. First time in its 405-year history that an African-American becomes Speaker of the House. Delegate Don Scott was sworn in today. Not only that, folks, by the Black Chief Justice of the Supreme Court of Virginia, Bernard Goodwin. It was a moving day, as Scott also thanked and invited former Virginia Governor Bob McDonnell, Republican. It was McDonnell who restored the voting rights of Don Scott, who in his speech talked about serving time in federal prison. It was certainly a moving day. Democrats control the Senate, but they also now control the Virginia House. Here is some of what Scott said.
I'm grateful and thankful to my colleagues for the trust that you have placed in me to lead this august body. The historic nature of my speakership is not lost on me. This will be the first time in the history of the Commonwealth of Virginia that we have had a speaker who was as intelligent as this and as handsome as this. No, what y'all laughing at? It's true. No, let me stop. But it's an honor and a privilege to be elected by my peers as the first Black Speaker of the House of Delegates. 405 years after the founding of the longest continuous democratic elected body in the Western Hemisphere. Also, coincidentally, 405 years after the first enslaved people arrived here. not far from where we stand, down the road in Hampton Roads. So I know I stand on the shoulders of those who came before me. And there's something about being the first to do something. I think about the folks that I look up to personally who never got this opportunity, who I still count as friends, who are brilliant. Forgive me, but they are legislators, former legislators, they're jurists, they're now colleagues and peers. And they served in this body, African Americans. People like Kenny Alexander, former delegate, senator from Norfolk, and Yvonne Miller, former delegate, fierce fighter, and senator from Norfolk. I think about former delegate Gerald Jones and my predecessor and mentor and friend from Portsmouth, now Circuit Court Judge Delegate Ken Melvin. All of these guys were brilliant. All of these ladies were brilliant. Yet they never had the opportunity to stand where I stand now. In fact, Judge Melvin told me he never even fathomed getting the opportunity to stand where I'm standing now. So I don't take this for granted. So I know I stand on the shoulders of giants. I can't even imagine what it must have been like for Doug Wilder, first black governor of Virginia, 1989. Or Fergie Reed, the first black person elected to the General Assembly since Reconstruction. Or George Tioma, who was elected during the Reconstruction to the General Assembly. He's a black man from Portsmouth. And he was a Republican. And every time I look around this room, I do see this. I see the ghost of those people who worked here, those black folks who were enslaved here, whose dignity and humanity was discounted right here in this room. I see those people. And I know we, not just I, we carry their hopes and dreams and their posterity. I carry it in my heart. I think about all of the people who never got their rights heard by people sitting in this chamber. Thank God the Commonwealth has turned the page. Thank God.
Now, there have been African Americans who have been speakers of the House in other states, New Jersey and California. But Dan Blue, you see right here, from 1991, 1995, was the first black speaker of the House from a southern state. This was North Carolina. Again, 1991 to 1995, Don Scott now becomes the second. The thing here, Robert, is when you talk about power, not only Don Scott being the Speaker of the House, the top official, the top person who controls the purse strings in the Virginia Senate is a black woman, State Senator Louise Lucas. And so what does it say that here you have Virginia, that was the cradle of the Confederacy. And when it comes to the state, Republican Governor Glenn Youngkin is the governor, but he can't get anything done without going through these two African Americans who control the House as well as control the Senate.
One, it tells us that, as we've said previously on this show, that if the candidate had been Justin Fairfax instead of Terry McAuliffe, there'd be a black governor in Virginia right now, and there'd be a black Speaker of the House, and there'd be a black leader of the Senate, and there'd be a black Chief Justice in that state. So let's remember that the Democratic Party of Virginia is the reason they don't have full power there by not standing behind Justin Fairfax when it was his term, very clearly, to be the governor of that state. But beyond that, this is why we're seeing these Republican attacks on quote-unquote DEI on the national level. If you've noticed, every few years they make up a new acronym to scare white people. First they turned Black Lives Matter to BLM, then they turned critical race theory into the CRT, and now they're turning diversity, equity, inclusion into DEI. They are afraid of exactly this. They are afraid of seeing what happens when African Americans have an opportunity, when the playing field is equal, as the Reverend Jackson says, when the score is public, when when the rules are fairly enforced, we excel. The entire reason they're trying to get rid of affirmative action programs in the Supreme Court is to keep us out of schools so we don't get on the pipeline to be able to hold office of this nature. The reason they're trying to get rid of corporate inclusion programs is because they want to ensure that African Americans never have an opportunity to progress to such a point that they can become part of both corporate and political leadership nationwide. And we have to stop ignoring these people when they make these attacks from the beginning. Right. Because we try to stop it from the back after the train's already going down the track. We have to stop it in its tracks where it is right now. And while they're attacking DEI, we have to put our foot in the ground and say, no, we are protecting these programs because that is the future of our community.
But here's the deal, Toron, and I say this all the time. Don Scott does not become Speaker of the House if folks do not vote in House races. Democrats were able to take control of the Virginia House. These were state House races. And so people spend lots of time focusing on the presidential race, focusing on U.S. Senate and congressional races. But this also shows why state races are critical and why we must exercise our right to vote.
And I'm glad you mentioned that, because this is something I think gets lost in translation a lot of the time. You know, presidential elections, midterm elections, those are quote unquote the sexy elections. People show up for those and they come out because there's a lot more push to get people to come out. What people don't understand is that when you have situations like this, or when you have, even like the brother alluded to in his speech, which was an amazing speech, by the way, and shout out to him for tying all the historical legacy up to that moment. Without him getting his rights restored, he wouldn't be in the position he is today. And those sort of things happen on the state and on the local level. Another thing that needs to be said as well is that there's a really good example in this brother's life story about actual reform and actual prison reform that can move somebody who may have made a mistake or may have had a couple of missteps earlier in their life to be able to come back, reinvent themselves, reform themselves, and then move into something like higher office. And for that to happen, you have to have legislation in place that allows people who've made mistakes to come back into society, be productive in society, and then advance themselves. And a lot of times these things happen on the state and local level. But because people are so focused on the elections that happen every 2 to 4 years, they forget these little things that you do every day, like your city council meetings, going to, voting for mayor, voting for judges, voting for initiatives on the ballot that happen in the state level. Nobody pays attention to that. And if you go try to vote for that, you can be in and out in 5 minutes, whereas a presidential election, it takes you 2 or 3 hours. We got to get more focused on local politics and collective politics instead of just individualism. And that has to happen as well.
And here's the deal, Rebecca. Let me remind people, if Democrats did not have a trifecta of the House, the Senate, and the governor's mansion, when, guess what? You would not see the changes in voting in that particular state. They changed the rules when it came to making it easier for individuals who were formerly incarcerated to actually have their rights restored. And having his rights restored by Republican Governor Bob McDonnell is what allowed for him to run for the state house. And now Don Scott's the speaker.
You know, Don Scott would not be the speaker if it wasn't for Evelyn Thomas Butts. She was a poor seamstress from Norfolk who was one of the named plaintiffs in the poll tax lawsuit in the 1960s that overturned the poll tax scheme in Virginia. And I just want to point that out. There's not just elected officials, but there's a long line of Black activists in Virginia that made Speaker Don Scott happen. But now going to the rights restoration, Virginia is one of the states that has arbitrary rights restoration, meaning that it's up to the governor's discretion on how fast and who exactly gets their rights restored in Virginia. So I'm hoping under Speaker Don Scott and under Senator Louise in the Virginia Senate, that they figure out how to pass actual legislation that removes the arbitrariness in voting rights restoration in Virginia. I believe that has to pass in 2 subsequent Virginia legislatures. And so that's another reason why continuing to vote matters, because for a change like that to happen, it can't just happen in this particular session, but then there has to be an intervening vote, meaning there has to be a vote for the Virginia Assembly and the Virginia Senate again, and then the same bill has to be reintroduced again and then passed for it to actually be a change in Virginia. So voting just this past fall 2023 is great, but there's also going to have to be voting in fall 2025 as well to make sure that voting rights actually are fully robust in Virginia.
Absolutely. And so congratulations to Don. And now cannot wait to see what he does leading the House there and what kind of public policy comes out of him controlling the House, Louise Lucas in the Senate as well. So it is going to be something that we're definitely looking forward to see. All right, folks, when we come back, more on Roland Martin Unfiltered, including Black and Missing. Plus, we'll also talk about a brother in North Carolina. He's getting $25 million after serving time in prison for a rape he did not commit. Folks, don't forget, supporters of what we do. Join the Bring the Funk fan club. You can send your check and money order to P.O. Box 57196, Washington, D.C., 20037-0196. Cash App, $RM Unfiltered, PayPal, or Martin Unfiltered. Venmo is RM Unfiltered, Zelle, Roland at RolandSMartin.com, Roland at RolandMartinUnfiltered.com. We'll be right back.
Grow your business or career with Grow with Google's wide range of online courses, digital training, and tools. Gain in-demand job skills with flexible online training programs designed to put you on the fast track to jobs in high-growth fields. No experience is necessary. Learn at your own pace. Complete the online certificate program on your own terms. Stand out to employers, get on a path to in-demand jobs, and connect with top employers who are currently hiring. Take one professional career certificate program or all 6. Earn a Google Career Certificate to prepare for a job in a high-growth field like data analytics, project management, UX design, cybersecurity, and more. All professional career certificate programs must be completed by December 31st, 2024. Scan the QR code to complete the application. There are 1,000 scholarships available. Grow with Google and J. Hood and Associates. Be job ready and qualify for in-demand jobs.
I'm Faraji Muhammad, live from LA. And this is The Culture. The Culture is a two-way conversation. You and me. We talk about the stories, politics, the good, the bad, and the downright ugly. So join our community every day at 3 p.m. Eastern and let your voice be heard. Hey, we're all in this together. So let's talk about it and see what kind of trouble we can get into. It's The Culture. Weekdays at 3, only on the Black Star Network.
This week on The Black Table with me, Greg Carr, reparations. Is it finally time? 2 of the country's foremost authorities on the subject will join me to try to answer that very question. Powerful installment of The Black Table with me, Greg Carr, right here, only on the Black Star Network.
What's up, everybody? It's your girl, Latasha from the A.
And you're watching Roland Martin Unfiltered.
All right, folks, our focus today's Black and Missing is a 17-year-old teen from New Britain, Connecticut, been missing since December 18th. Folks, London Wilson is 4 feet 11 inches tall with brown hair and brown eyes. London has several piercings in her ears, nose, and navel. She may go by the name Lundy or Nanny. Anyone with information about London Wilson should call the Hartford, Connecticut Police Department at 860-757-4000, 860-757-4000. Federal Appeals Court gives suspended Florida State Attorney Andrew Warren some hope of getting his job back. The court affirmed, the 11th Circuit affirmed that Governor Ron DeSantis violated the First Amendment by removing the Tampa prosecutor from his elected post and disagreed with the lower court's view that no action could be taken. In a 59-page ruling, the 11th Circuit Court of Appeals wrote Wednesday that the Tallahassee federal judge who declined to return Warren to office should reconsider some aspects of the case. The majority opinion, authored by Judge Jill Pryor, critiqued the legal reasoning of an earlier decision by U.S. District Judge Robert Hinkle, who largely agreed that Warren's suspension was wrong, but concluded he lacked the authority to return him to office. The ruling returns the case to Hinkle's court. Warren said he is not seeking re-election. DeSantis suspended Warren in 2022, accusing him of neglect of duty and incompetence. Warren signed statements with signed statements with other prosecutors across the country opposing criminal charges against abortion providers or women seeking abortions. He also said he wouldn't prosecute people for providing gender-affirming health care, and his office's policies didn't change people with some minor crimes. DeSantis has also suspended State's Attorney Monique Worrell last year, and she's also challenging him as well. Folks, in North Carolina, a black man will receive a $25 million after being wrongfully convicted and serving 44 years in prison. Ronnie Wallace Long's settlement between the state and the city of Concord has concluded. Long, who is now 68, was accused of raping a white woman. An all-white county jury, which Long's attorneys say it was handpicked by local law enforcement leaders, convicted him of burglary and rape in 1976. At the age of 21, he received 2 life sentences. He was helped by a wrongful convictions clinic at Duke University's law school. Long's attorneys said more than 40 fingerprints collected from the scene did not match Long and were not shared with his defense attorney. Semen samples also were never turned over to the defense. That evidence later disappeared. The settlement also includes a public written apology from the city of Concord for its role in his imprisonment. They stated, "We're deeply remorseful for the past wrongs that caused tremendous harm to Mr. Long, his family, friends, and our community. While there are no measures to fully restore to Mr. Long and his family all that was taken from them through this agreement, we are doing everything in our power to right the past wrongs and take responsibility." In August 2020, a federal appeals court ordered a new hearing for Long in his efforts to obtain relief. His conviction was immediately vacated and Long was released from prison. Governor Roy Cooper granted him a full pardon of innocence later that year. The thing here with these cases, Torun, it shows you why you need to have integrity units. We recently lost Craig Watkins. He was the first black DA in Texas history in Dallas County. He died last month at the age of 56. And he established the first integrity unit to go back and look at cases like this to make sure that the people who were convicted were properly convicted. And we've seen other DAs do this, but the reality is this here. It's progressive DAs who are doing this. It's black DAs who are doing this. I go back to what I said in the last segment about voting. If Craig Watkins isn't voted into office, if other DAs are not voted into office, they don't go back and look at these cases. But you've got a lot of Republican conservative DAs who don't care about looking into old cases. They will fight to keep people like Long in prison, even though they know they didn't do it.
And something else that has to be said as well. First of all, I'm glad that brother had his freedom. I'm glad he was alive enough to be able to breathe the free air on the outside. Unfortunately, according to the Innocence Project, the vast majority of exonerated prisoners in these situations are black males. And we know that 9 times out of 10, what he was accused of has been the catalyst for the destruction of black towns. It's been definitely the catalyst for the destruction of black lives, whether judicially or extrajudicially. We know the lynching history in this country. As far as having an actual DA and somebody who's willing to go back and look at these cases, we have to also be aware, we have to also make sure that the people who we vote into office have a passion for righting some of the wrongs that have been done in their names going back decades. The case of this man, I won't say young man, the case of this man, unfortunately, is not unique. There are other brothers who are in prison for decades. Some of them did not survive. Some of them died in prison who went through these same things. You have to be able to have people in office. And you also have to have people on the outside, whether it's family or you have people who are prison reform activists or people who are judicial activists who are able to get the ear of people who you vote in to say that this is what's a miscarriage of justice. This is what needs to be done. Can you please go back and look at this? And I also think as well, and I've talked about this before, that I think there needs to be consequences for prosecutors who push these cases forward when they know they don't have enough evidence, and they can stack the jury with people who think they do, and they can just railroad young black men into the prison system with no consequences. That has to happen as well. Money moves everything in this country, and we have to have people that deal with consequences on that side as well.
But you also have to have here, Robert, you've got to have changes in state law, because there are some states where individuals serve time in prison wrongfully convicted. They don't receive a cent.
You're absolutely correct, and this is why I've been calling for federal legislation on this. That, as you said, these things happen at the state and local level, and it's almost a crapshoot. That if you just happen to be in a city or a municipality that has, as you said, a public integrity unit, or where Barry Scheck and the Innocent Project is able to get in contact with you, but there are thousands. I want people to understand. Probably tens of thousands of cases like this across the country. We've been beat across the head with the statistics on black men in prison for decades now. But every time I would walk into a jail to talk to a client, and every lawyer knows this, you'll have people reaching their hand out the cell, people trying to get your attention, telling you that they didn't do it, that they are innocent. They just need somebody to hear them out. I get letters in the mail, handwritten letters from prisons across the country, prisoners across the country asking for help, asking for somebody to look into their case. I want everyone who writes to know. I see your letters, I read them. We just don't have the resources available to be able to reach out and help every person. This is why we have to have federal legislation to look back 50 years or 100 years and put attorneys in a federal agency under the Justice Department to investigate these, put the FBI resources behind it to investigate these cases, and then set up a federal governmental fund to compensate people or compensate their families for these wrongful convictions that have taken men out of households for decades at a time. They've destroyed lives, destroyed communities, destroyed families. It has to happen on a national level. Otherwise, it's just a piecemeal approach, and it's almost like winning the lottery to actually have somebody be able to look into your case and be able to bring these things back up and to be exonerated. Believe these individuals when they tell you they've been railroaded. Believe them when they tell you that the prosecutors lied, that they fabricated evidence. I got one letter in the mail. The man said he wasn't even in the same state when the crime took place, but yet and still been in prison for over a decade. We have to have the federal government step in, and we have to make this an election issue in 2024, that while we want to run around the administration wants to talk about all the things they've done, make this one of the hallmarks, one of the tent poles of your platform, and say that we will work to release and to compensate and to restore justice for all those who have been wrongfully convicted because of their race in this country. That is what we need, and that's what it's going to take.
Absolutely. Rebecca.
You know, following on with what Robert was saying, we know that Joe Biden is going to have a problem with black men and making sure that black men turn out to vote for him. So following on what Robert said, there does need to be a federal task force looking into this. We know anecdotally, but also through statistics, from the 70s, 80s, and 90s, millions of black men disappeared from our streets, and many of them ended up in prison. We also know that Biden, especially with the 1993 crime bill and other things, with both Biden and then later with the Clinton administration, led to an increase in the number of black men being locked up. So is it time now for there to actually be a federal task force to actually deal with some of these issues, especially when we know that there are some folks who are innocent, who are behind the prison walls? Something that I want to point out, I'm glad that the apology happened. I'm glad the $25 million happened. But what's interesting at the state level, the state was only able to give Ronnie Lung, I think, about $750,000 because that was the statutory maximum. You know, so I'm glad that he was able to go into the federal system and actually get that additional $25 million. But thinking about all of the other black men who are locked up, and like Robert said, who have very similar stories, you know, apology and money, that's great, but their life was taken away. He's 68 years old. 44 years of him being actually able to live a full life was stripped away from him and his loved ones and his community, where he would have added value to his community during the last 44 years. Finally, if any of those law enforcement folks are still alive, they need to be prosecuted and thrown in prison. It's not good enough just for apology or money, but those who did the wrong, they need to be punished.
Indeed, indeed. All right, folks, hold tight 1 second. For a quick break, we'll be right back. Roland Martin Unfiltered on the Black Star Network.
Next, Get Wealthy with me, Deborah Owens, America's Wealth Coach. We're talking about the difficulty of being able to acquire wealth for Black Americans. My guest, Emily Flitter, is the author of The White Wall: How Big Finance is Bankrupting Black Americans.
The bad stuff that you feel when you're dealing with the financial services industry is not your fault. It's not your fault, and you don't deserve to be treated like this.
That's right here on Get Wealthy, only on Black Star Network.
On the next, A Balanced Life with me, Dr. Jackie, just who do you think you are? And maybe more importantly, who is it that you think you're trying to please? The answer to that second question is really wrapped up in the first. Think about that, being the true, authentic you, no matter the circumstance.
But we learn the art of forgiveness, not only of forgiving one another, but forgiving ourselves. And we also learn how to love ourselves so that we can love each other.
That's next on A Balanced Life, here on Black Star Network.
Next on The Frequency, we're talking Black women in fashion. My guest, Renee Wilson, is speaking on the challenges of starting her own fashion line.
So I wanted to really be able to design the clothes, but add a modern twist to it so that we could wear these patterns in everyday wear and not just reserve it for our formal ceremonies.
That's next on The Frequency on the Black Star Network.
My name is Lena Charles, and I'm from Opelousas, Louisiana. Yes, that is Zydeco capital of the world.
My name is Margaret Chappelle. I'm from Dallas, Texas, representing the Urban Trivia Game.
It's me, Sherry Shepard, and you know what you watch.
Roland Martin on Unfiltered.
All right, folks, let's talk about student loans. You know, one thing that drives me crazy is when I listen to people on television, on radio, on social media, and they run their mouths talking about, oh, how Biden and Harris, they failed us. They said they were going to sit here and get rid of student loan debt. Well, we already know that $132 billion in student loan relief has come to folks, to 3.9 million people. The president, of course, was overruled by the Supreme Court when it came to that. But look at the SAVE plan by the Biden-Harris administration. And so basically, what this plan lays out is that if you're a low-income family, and if you're a family of four and you have $60,000 in household income, you pay nothing. Look at the numbers right here, folks. You actually see what is here. So this graph says the SAVE plan calculates your monthly payment based on your income and family size. So starting this summer, if you're making $32,800 per year or less, roughly $15 per hour, your monthly payment will be zero. If you make more than that, you could save at least $1,000 per year compared to other IDR plans. Here's why this is important, Rebecca. Again, Republicans out there, they hate this. They want folks to pay everything back. And so for the people out there who are making decisions, do you want to support Biden-Harris for re-election, or do you want to support Trump, or you want to vote third party, you want to say run these off, let's be perfectly clear right now. If it comes down to Biden versus Trump, one of them supports student loan debt relief, one of them absolutely does not.
Biden put forth a plan of where $20,000 of student loans would have been forgiven if you received Pell Grants, and then $10,000 would have been forgiven for everyone else. The only thing that stopped that from implementation is that many Republican attorney generals, including from my home state of Nebraska, filed a case and it went to the Supremes, and the Supreme Court decided, hey, you know, Biden can't do this. And so the very party that's actually stopping for more student loan forgiveness from happening is the Republican Party. That's very factual. That's not a partisan statement. This is what just happened last year. But like you said, I hope voters pay attention. And if this is a voting issue for you, the amount of student debt that you have and what it looks like to be able to afford to live and then to pay back your student loans, then pay attention to actually what what's going on here. And then finally, I would tell the Biden administration, it's great that there are things that you've done to alleviate student debt and financial burden on families in America. Make sure that you're talking about it. Not only that, but make sure that you have young people and working families across the country empowered to talk about it on your behalf, community by community, because unfortunately, the messaging isn't getting to the everyday voter who's voting on this particular issue.
Again, to run, elections have consequences. And the reality is this. If Trump beats Biden in 2020, you don't have $132 billion in student loan debt relief. You don't have this happening either. If Trump beats Biden, all of this is getting rolled back.
That's a very good point, but we also have to make the point that if we're going to vote Democratic, we have to actually vote in people who really do believe in these policies and are going to stick with these policies. Because over the last couple of years, we had this conversation about voting Democratic and vote blue no matter who, and that's how we got Sinema in, and that's how we got Manchin. And if you have people who are on your side who are pushing back against everything that you're trying to do, then it's really hard to push back against what the Republicans do. We understand what the
No. Hold on. What I said was, first of all, this is an administrative, this is an executive branch decision. So this is not the United States Senate where you have Sinema or who's in the House. What I'm saying is, if you have a Trump Department of Education, you're not going to see this plan continue.
No, I understand that, but what I'm saying is from the point of view of someone who's a voter and from the point of view of somebody who's making those decisions in an election year that's coming up, if you don't make the case about why things happen and why things don't, and if you don't make the case about why some things are moving and some things are not, the average voter is just going to see, well, the things that I want to see happen are not happening, and I'm going to vote accordingly. That doesn't mean that it may be true, it may not be. We're talking about the emotional response that somebody has when they see something that's important to them not being pushed forward. And if that messaging isn't done, then this is what you're going to get.
Well, Robert, that's the whole point of, again, saying what's actually being done. The reality is this here. People can say, oh, we did not get the George Floyd Justice Act. We know exactly what happened. It passed in the House. It stalled in the Senate because you didn't have, of course, you had Tim Scott and Lindsey Graham. But again, when it comes to what is happening with the executive branch with student loan debt relief, when people say, oh, I saw a video the other day, some voters in South Carolina, and the woman was like, well, I haven't seen student loan debt relief. Again, $132 billion, that's real. I posted this on my Instagram feed, and there were a number of people who were like, man, thank God for this, I got mine wiped out. There were literal testimonials from people. So it's actually happening, but let's be clear, Republicans are on record. They want to stop all student loan debt relief.
And well, Roland, I'm going to give you a testimonial, and if the Biden administration, Department of Education is listening, feel free to use this in the commercial. By feel free, I mean send me a check. But so I practice civil rights law, as in I have done murder cases for the money out of grandmama's bra before. Everyone thinks that every lawyer is a highly paid, flying private jet lawyer. That is not the case. Many cases where you're dealing with community members, where you're dealing with people who aren't of means, where you're going to Bankhead and dealing with somebody's nephew who got arrested for knocking over a liquor store. You might be doing a murder case for $3,000 or $4,000. You might only get half of that money. Meanwhile, I think I got out of law school with $163,000 in student loan debt, and that is with scholarships. That's with working during law school. That is with doing everything possible to save money and to minimize costs. I'm not one of those people who took out the maximum amount of loans so they could live on Magnificent Mile in Chicago. I lived right there in next to Cottage Grove. So just to set the ground rule for what those things were. My student loan payments were $1,632 a month. After applying for this plan, the new plan that came out and getting it processed, under this new SAVE plan, my student loans went from $1,632 a month down to $212 a month.
Wow, hold on, that's a savings of $1,400 a month?
$100 a month. So people are making decisions as to whether or not to have children based on student loans. People have to make decisions on whether or not to buy a house, to buy a car, based on student loans. When me and my wife got married, we didn't put my name on the house because we were afraid that my student loans would affect our interest rate and affect my ability to get the house that we wanted. And thank God my wife was a loving wife who stuck with me through my broke times, because otherwise she could have put my ass out at some point in time. These are major life decisions that are based on this student loan issue, and it affects the ability of our communities to have doctors who are able to care for the poor and care for low-income communities, to have accountants they're able to care for and take care of and be available in low-income communities. Not just to have lawyers, but have lawyers who have a heart for social justice and civil rights, be able to afford to be able to make the sacrifices in order to do so. If you go to parks nowadays, if you look at millennials, people in their mid-30s to mid-40s, you'll see them walking dogs instead of baby carriages because they can't afford children and child care. When child care is $2,500 a month, you have to choose either I'm going to pay my $1,600 student loans are going to have a child and reproduce for the future. So this idea that nothing has been done is antithetical to the facts. What has to happen is we realize that this is step one. And if you get a majority in the House of Representatives, which the math says we should be able to do, and if you get a majority in the or a filibuster-proof majority in the U.S. Senate, you can pass legislative as opposed to executive branch student loan relief that will allow them to have the full cancellation that you're looking for. However, sitting at home and not voting and allowing the MAGA movement to get back in power, the MAGA movement has two parts of their base. On the one hand, they have the millionaires and billionaires, the people who got the Trump tax cuts, that $2 trillion. They don't care about student loans because they didn't have to pay them. Their daddy and their granddaddy paid for them, just like Jared Kushner paid $2 million to get into college. On the other hand, the poor rural MAGAs aren't going to college. They're, as Donald Trump said, I love the poorly educated voters, and they feel bitter towards people with student loans because they feel like they never had to go to college. They don't want to pay your loans off. It takes a majority for Democrats, and it's going to take the Biden administration a second term with a majority in the House and the Senate to do full student loan cancellation. But for what we have right now, you are saving millions of families, millions of millennials in particular, the ability to actually have the hope of having a life going forward.
Yep, simple as that. Rebecca, Toran, Robert, appreciate all of y'all being on today's show. Thank you so very much. Enjoy it. Folks, coming up next on the show, first of all, University of Tennessee, I'll see y'all tomorrow for your MLK program. But coming up next on the show, I'll be talking with the author of this book, y'all. It is called Blackball, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, Spencer Haywood, and the generation that saved the soul of the NBA. That is next right here on Roland Martin Unfiltered on the Black Star Network.
On the streets, a horrific scene, a white nationalist rally that descended into deadly violence.
White people are losing their damn minds.
As an angry pro-Trump mob storms the U.S. Capitol,
we're about to see the rise of what I call white minority resistance. We have seen white folks in this country who simply cannot tolerate black folks voting.
I think what we're seeing is the inevitable result of violent denial.
This is part of American history. Every time that people of color have made progress, whether real or symbolic, there has been what Carol Anderson at Emory University calls white rage as a backlash.
This is the rise of the Proud Boys and the Boogaloo Boys. America, there's going to be more of this.
Here's all the Proud Boys, guys.
This country is getting increasingly racist in its behaviors and its attitudes because of the fear of white people.
The fear that they're taking our jobs, they're taking our resources, they're taking our women. This is white fear.
Muhammad, live from LA. And this is The Culture. The Culture is a two-way conversation. You and me. We talk about the stories, politics, the good, the bad, and the downright ugly. So join our community every day at 3 p.m. Eastern and let your voice be heard. Hey, we're all in this together. So let's talk about it and see what kind of trouble we can get into. It's The Culture. Weekdays at 3, only on the Black Star Network.
right, Theresa, let's jump right into this. The nation's first black newspaper, Freedom's Journal, wrote on March 16, 1827, "We wish to plead our own cause. Too long have others spoken for us." That has been the mantra of the black press ever since then. And reading just right at the introduction, I think you lay out something that a lot of people have no idea about how white sports newsrooms are, and how when they set the tone, when they set the narrative, then that sort of becomes the standard. And for all of these years, the narrative has been just how awful the NBA was in the late 70s and the 1980s, and how it was a drug-infested league, and it took Larry Bird and Magic Johnson to somehow come and save the NBA. But your thesis lays out really the role of the black athlete in really establishing what you label as the soul of the NBA. To talk about that, because I think that is so hugely important. Those who wrote those stories, they have created this notion of what the NBA was, and your book lays out, they didn't get it right.
Yeah, so I start in 1980 with that infamous expose by Chris Cobbs of the LA Times, where he basically says that 40 to 75% of NBA players were using cocaine. And he paints the league like a drug-infested den of criminality. And of course, at that time, by the time you get to the late 1970s and early 80s, we're talking about a league that had become majority black. So it is read as a black crisis. And when I first read that, I had a lot of folks who told me about that article, who in their books, they just quoted it uncritically, who just used that as the way to frame the entire period of the 1970s and early 80s NBA. And of course, as a historian of African American history, I just didn't believe it. I knew that, of course, basketball was changing demographically to include more black players, and that you had the likes of Earl the Pearl Monroe, you had the likes of Julius Dr. J. Irving, who were coming into the league, transforming the style of play. And so I just didn't believe it. And so it opened up all of these questions for me about why was that the racialized narrative that was not only prevalent at that time, but has come to, I think, really structure all of our conversations about Black athletes, even up to today. And the role of white journalists, and particularly the role of the white sports media in that, was very apparent to me, in the sense that white journalists were often almost like the handmaiden or the microphone of the team owners. So anytime there were labor disputes, questions about the reserve clause or the draft rules, or black players were pointing out racism in the league, white sports journalists would often come to the defense of the league and come to the defense of the team owners. And of course, we also have to remember the role of the fans in that as well, because the NBA at that time really imagined the archetypal NBA fan as being a white guy for the most part. They were not thinking about black fans. And so white fans were also taking in race at that time, and were often used against the players in their various labor disputes.
So and the reason I want to stay on that track is because what we were talking about that people just somehow, I think, keep removing. We're dealing with white-run, white-controlled institutions. We're dealing with NBA teams, white-run, white-controlled. We're dealing with mainstream media, white-run, white-controlled. When you look at, my good buddy
Gary Howard when he became the sports editor of the Milwaukee Sentinel, he was the only black top sports editor in America. So not only are we talking about a league that was predominantly black, you had the individuals that were covering the league who looked just like the owners. So, the framing of the NBA, its style, it's all the different things that goes along with it, were being written about and talked about through the prism of whiteness, which by now them speaking to the audience gave everyone else their interpretation of these black ball players. This is what I talk about, the power of whiteness. When they're controlling institutions, they are establishing what the narrative is.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's why I focused a lot on the black press, black players' own words in their own memoirs. I, in particular, used a magazine from the 1970s. It was in existence from about 1971 to 1978. It was called Black Sports. What a gem, if anyone can get a hold of it. I read a full run of it at the Penn State Library. And one of the things that Black Sports did, it was kind of like Sports Illustrated, but for and by African Americans. And it really covered sports from the perspective of the African American community and their political concerns, their economic concerns. And there were all sorts of interviews with Black players at that time. For example, in the lead up to the Senate hearings on the merger of the American Basketball Association and the NBA Basketball Association in the early 1970s, they had on, they had a rap session with particularly Oscar Robertson was one of the folks who was being interviewed, and he was the face of the lawsuit against the reserve clause and the monopolistic practices of the NBA at that time. And they gave him, full run to make all kinds of critiques about the ways in which, the anti-competitive practices of both leagues, in fact, were used to suppress player mobility, to take away, their right to contest their working conditions, their ability to negotiate for a contract that was fair, considering their immense talents. And so you really, in order to get a full picture of this period, have to look at the Black press, have to look at the actual words of the players themselves. And that's one of the most striking things, is that Black athletes at that time had their own critique of the industry. They understood that the way that the NBA ran as a corporation was essentially treating them as possessions, and they couldn't help but understand, the way that the NBA ran and the fact that it was essentially a lily white ownership. They couldn't help but see that against the backdrop of a longer history of slavery, racism under Jim Crow, and all of the ongoing fights at that time for racial integration and Black power. And so the NBA became this kind of battleground where the players, the fans, the media, and then also the league itself were really having a discussion about what it meant to live in a society where African Americans were gaining more inclusion and more power and more economic power and more cultural power at the same time.
Also, I think what we're dealing with, which you, of course, certainly tackled, is that, so let's just use 1980 again, as you said, as that marker. So if we use 1980 as the marker, and I'll just use my age as a part of it. So November 1980, I'm 12 years old, born in 1968. The reason I'm saying that, so I'm 12 years old. So for the audience, and I think a lot of times people don't think in these terms, we're talking about individuals who, if we're using 68 as the marker, King's assassination on April 4th, 1968, we're only talking about a 12-year period. So we're talking about a generation of athletes who were coming of age professionally, and they were the first wave after the end of the Black freedom movement, the civil rights movement. And so you take a Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, who was a central figure in the 1970s, was there at that meeting as one of the leaders with Muhammad Ali and Jim Brown and Bill Russell and Oscar Robertson when they met with Ali with regards to him choosing not to go to the Vietnam War. But people forget Abdul-Jabbar boycotted playing for the United States in the 1968 Olympics. And so you're talking about individuals who brought a sense of purpose with them and that conflicted with these owners, to your point, who wanted folks just to shut up, and let's use the phrase that white conservatives still want to say about LeBron and today, just shut up and dribble.
Yeah. Was one who did not play by those scripts. I think one of the most interesting things about Kareem is even as he was coming into the league and negotiating his contract, he was able to pit the American Basketball Association against the National Basketball Association. He had both teams, the Nets and the Bucks, and he told them, listen, you come to me with your best and final offer. Come to my team. I'm not going to go back and forth with you. And this is a guy who's just a young guy out of college. You know, he has his team with him. And he said, I'm not going to, bargain back and forth and go back and forth with you to try and get the price that I want for my contract. You just come with your best offer, because he understood that he did not want to get into a kind of bidding war, because he understood that he was, in essence, a kind of piece of property under this athletic system as it was in the early 70s.
But he also knew his worth, though. He knew his value.
Yeah, they did. They did.
The reason I'm laughing, because that's actually how I've always negotiated. Like, literally, I've said, the reason I'm like literally laughing, because I've negotiated my deals by saying, listen, you make an offer. If I like it, I'll accept it. But I'm only going to counter one time.
Right.
We're not going to be sitting here going to this back and forth, because I know my worth.
Absolutely.
And this is a guy who was the dominant player in high school, dominant player in college. This ain't a hard conversation.
No. And the thing about that was that he actually, in one of his memoirs, said, look, I didn't want to feel like a piece of meat that was being traded. So either you come at me with your best offer, or I'm just going to go to the next team. And so that was his entry into the league. And then once he's in the league, he refused to follow the traditional racial scripts that were expected of Black athletes, Black professional athletes at that time. You had to be grateful. You had to be submissive. You had to be congenial. You always had to be in a good mood. You had to be smiling. And most of all, you had to be apolitical. Now, Kareem was none of those things. Of course, at the time, he had not yet announced when he first came into the league that he had taken on his new name, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. So, but he was known as this guy who just wasn't really going to play nice with the white media. He managed to piss off a lot of folks in Milwaukee. Talk about the fact that he would go to a press conference. And of course, we know from watching sports media that sometimes they ask pretty inane questions. So I'm imagining that Kareem was sitting there, they're asking him questions about the game. And, when he didn't really feel like it was a question worth answering, he would either just give a one-word answer, or he would grunt, he'd just be like, And so even that performance of, again, knowing your worth and understanding that you don't have to, shuck and jive for the media was revolutionary in and of itself.
I want to stay on that point in terms of what the expectations were, in terms of how they behaved. And again, for people today not really understanding those times, we're talking about Jackie Robinson coming into Major League Baseball in 1947. We're talking about the first Black athlete to win the Heisman Trophy. We're talking about the first Blacks coming to the NFL, then the NBA. And so much of this also, again, I'm going back to white sports writers establishing the narrative. Look at these high-paid Negroes. These were individuals who never came across African Americans who were making this amount of money. And what you heard them say about these NBA players, which you write about during this period, is literally what white sports writers and white fans say today. And even when you talk about fans, you still have this narrative from fans as if they own the players even today.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we're right in the middle of March Madness. And, I wrote a piece that was contesting the fact that, why does the NCAA not pay the players or remunerate them, in accordance with the billions of dollars that they rake in? And, the responses are typically, well, it provides them such an opportunity. And now when you're talking about, for example, NCAA D1 basketball, you're talking about a majority Black sport. And so, the NCAA goes around spouting this narrative that they are purveyors of Black opportunity and racial uplift. Well, the NBA was doing that in the early 1970s, making it seem as if, oh, geez, we're taking these young men who are struggling, we're giving them a chance to play. They should be grateful to us. And so in saying that, they're completely erasing the talent and the labor that Black athletes were providing, which were creating the profits for professional basketball. And so, in the first part of the book, I look at a series of antitrust cases. The first one lodged by Connie Hawkins versus the NBA, which took on the practice of blacklisting. Blacklisting of Connie Hawkins, he was unjustly accused of being part of a gambling scandal. The NBA didn't bother to investigate. They just said, okay, we're not going to touch him. Then you have Spencer Haywood, who wanted to jump from the ABA to the NBA. He had not completed 4 years beyond his high school graduation, and the NBA had this rule because they wanted to control the flow of players into the NBA in order to help suppress wages. And Spencer Haywood takes them on, and Spencer Haywood v. the NBA, and upends the 4-year rule. Then you have Oscar Robertson et al. V. the NBA. And that case was the case that ended up bringing down the reserve clause. Now, the reserve clause at that time, once you were drafted to a particular team, the team had complete control over you and your contract. They could dispense with you when they pleased. There was no such thing as free agency. You could not shop your talents on the free market. So it automatically kept players under the thumb of owners and also kept their wages pretty stagnant. And so here you have Black-led antitrust suits in the early 70s, right? Just removed from the civil rights and actually amid the Black Power movement. They're contesting the white ownership and the monopolistic practices of the professional basketball leagues. And white fans and white sports writers were like, whoa, 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 whoa. You need to just be grateful that we're even allowing you to play here. And you're making too much money already, and all you're doing is playing a game. And so you can see that dynamic play out. I mean, I think of all the times when, the NBA has locked out its players over the years. Same kind of racial dynamic gets invoked. Look at these greedy players. They shouldn't be asking for more. They should just shut up and play.
Owners are never called greedy. The owners are never greedy.
They're purveyors of humanitarian racial uplift. And that's how, and part of that narrative is for them to say, oh, we're not making any money. We're not making any money. But even in the early 1970s, economists at that time who were studying this said, actually, even if teams aren't making a huge profit, the losses in their basketball ventures can count against their earnings in other sectors. So owners were actually using, their basketball franchises to offset their taxes, their tax bills. So no, these were not, humanitarian institutions. They were for-profit corporations. Despite the fact that they were trying to claim that they were doing so much good for, young Black men.
Reminds me of when Michael Jordan got into with Abe Pollan during negotiations, and Pollan was complaining about how he never made a profit with the Washington Bullets, later the Wizards. And Michael was like, well, hell, if you can't make a profit with NBA teams, sell a damn team. Pollan never forgot that comment, which I always said, trust me, ain't nobody sitting there owning a professional sports franchise and you supposedly keep losing money, and somehow it's bad against you. You laid through these three important cases, and I want to bring in Curt Flood as well.
Yeah.
And what I think is important for the audience to know, that when we're talking about labor, we're talking about the Black athlete that literally changed the future of all athletics by virtue of their willingness to take a stand. White players were not as willing to challenge this system, but it was these Black athletes who literally put careers on the line to challenge the system. And every athlete today, basketball, football, soccer, hockey, I don't care what it is, owes it to the Black athlete, those individuals who sued these leagues for really this system that we have today that allows them not just to have free agency, not just to be able to one and done. I mean, all kinds of different things. That's really, what set all of this up. The Black athlete unwilling to frankly be, as Bill Rhoton said, a $40 million slave.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And I think that, it doesn't surprise me in some ways that Black athletes were at the leading edge of all of this. So Curt Flood, Connie Hawkins, Spencer Haywood, Oscar Robertson, even John Mackey, if we're thinking about the NFL. To me, it's not surprising because they understood that all of these, monopolistic mechanisms in place that suppressed competition hurt all athletes, but they hurt Black athletes in particular. One of the things that we have to remember is that in the early 70s, this was just the beginning of the time when Black athletes could make extra money off the court through endorsements. There wasn't huge endorsement money. So their salary really was the thing that they had to make sure was commensurate with their talents. And so they could not, at the same time, they could not help but see these labor fights in the context of sport as part of the larger Black freedom struggle. Oscar Robertson had all sorts of troubles with the Cincinnati Royals, and they treated him, like the help. And this is a guy who was immensely talented, who brought so much to the table. When he, eventually became the head of the NBPA, which is the National Basketball Players Association, the union that represents the players in the NBA, he essentially turned that union into a kind of civil rights organization. Before that, when it was run by predominantly white players, it was a union that kind of cozied up to management, that didn't really challenge things, that was mostly the province of the stars of the league. And one of the things that Oscar Robertson did, looking around at all of the lessons he learned from civil rights activism and the budding Black Power movement, he said, we need everybody to be in this union. We need the guys who are sitting on the bench. We need the marginal players. We need the stars. We need everybody from top to bottom. And we have to function like a collective unit, or else we're not going to have any leverage against the players, or sorry, against the owners. And so he used those skills, coming up in the age of civil rights and Black Power, and deployed them in the realm of sport, and radically reshaped the power relationship between team owners and players, all players, but especially for Black players who bore the brunt of those policies.
We talked about this earlier, and I really got to go. I got to go back to it because I really think, goodness, as I am looking at this, I get the sense there's really another book inside of this book when we talk about white power and white journalism. And I just think about, you talk about in here Daryl Dawkins. And when I look at these names, these are individuals that in the world today, people go, oh my God, they are lauded as these great journalists. And I'm gonna start for one that you don't mention here. When I think back to Brent Musburger and the savage things that he said about those Black athletes in Mexico City in 1968. And then you talk about, again, one of the names that has always been lauded as one of the greats, Curry Kirkpatrick, Sports Illustrated, and the things that he said about Daryl Dawkins, a savage animal roaming unchained. They nicknamed him Baby Gorilla. They derided what he wore, things along those lines. But then to sit here and look at, again, I need people paying attention, how these white journalists, how they set the framework. When Curry Kirkpatrick said about the 76ers, the reputation, the Black Stars, for the reputation for being, quote, wealthy, spoiled, egocentric, selfish monsters. These words, how they describe them, describing Black athletes in animalistic terms, and how but when it came to defining the white athlete as being smart, as being in terms of the different words. I think about that speech from Dr. King when he talked about the words in the dictionary to describe Black and the words in the dictionary to describe white. Malcolm X did the exact same thing. These were the individuals who were establishing, planting the seed and flowering it, watering it and building it up, that created this notion of these are these sick, despicable individuals. And I can look at their language and literally trace a line directly back to how people of African descent who were slaves were called.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. For all that people say about critical race theory, one of the things that I tried to do in the book was to actually analyze what kinds of metaphors are they using to describe Black players? What are the narratives that keep showing up again and again and again? And the fact that no one really reacted to it at the time. And the example that you were talking about, that was 1977. That was, yeah, I was 2 years old. If we're going to talk about, where to place me in all this. But, this was not that long ago.
Well, but
And
there were virtually no Black journalists on the newsrooms. I mean, it wasn't until that Kerner Commission report in '68 where you really saw your first wave of Black journalists. So
Yeah.
you didn't have Black editors, you didn't have Black copywriters, you didn't have people who were sitting there going, "What the hell is this?" You had white writers being edited by white editors, working for white publishers, whose idea was we're talking to white people because they don't read. That literally was the mentality.
Yeah, absolutely. And, talk about lily whiteness in chapter 5 when I talk about Simon Gourdine, who, is such a rarely mentioned figure in NBA history, but at the time in the early 70s and to the mid 70s was the highest ranking Black sports administrator in all of North American sport. He eventually became the deputy commissioner to Walter Kennedy. He was a lawyer. He was not a former athlete, so he was different from other, coaches and GMs at the time, Black GMs at the time, who usually had to have been former players. So this guy is completely written out of the history.
Right.
He's by himself. He's by himself in the front office. Like, can you imagine being by yourself in the NBA office in New York City, attempting to be a conscientious Black man, but also having to find the balance between simultaneously being a representative of the NBA and then recognizing that you are the liaison with a mostly Black league? And the amount of pressure that he felt, which you can, when you're reading, particularly like his interviews, again, with Black Sports magazine from the 1970s, he's talking about the burden of representation as being the only guy in the office, the only voice in the office. And he really believed that he could make some change within. But when you're the only guy, I mean, where is your power in that? And that's why it's so important also to tell the story of, all of the Black players who contributed to the NBPA and their collective power, because in coming together, they were actually able to use that leverage against the team owners and begin to also speak back as a collective voice in the media. When they, of course, white journalists bothered to talk to them. That was one of the other things I found, was that white journalists would often just only talk to the team owners or the coaches or the GMs. They would not actually talk to the players themselves to get their perspective on anything. So I had to go to the Black press to find that.
And this is why we see, and this is why, and again, for people, I know I sound like a broken record, but when you take a Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, these white sports writers created, he's aloof, he's mean-spirited, he's nasty, he won't talk to us. Go to baseball, the things they said about Jim Rice. Stay in baseball, what they said about Barry Bonds. He's surly, he's nasty, on and on and on. These are the individuals who are crafting the narrative for the public, and they're the ones who are describing this. I remember I was at the NBA, Dallas Mavericks had a media day, and we were sitting around the table, and there was a white sports, and there was several of us who were in Black radio and some other places, and so Allen Iverson came up. And so this white sports writer, who's still a writer in the NBA, goes, Allen Iverson's a thug, because he was describing his hair. And I said, I'm sorry, excuse me, how's he a thug? I said, is Cherokee Parks a thug because he's got a mullet? I said, do you know Allen Iverson? Do you know? I said, but I said, see here, when I say I got all in his ass, I said, here's the deal. You and other white sports writers, y'all decide to create a narrative. It's picked up by the white sports radio folks because there are very few black people in sports radio. And I said, and so now you want to establish who a particular person is. And this guy sort of, I mean, he was like shell shocked because no one had talked to him like that. And I didn't give a damn, but I knew exactly what he was doing. And that's literally what these folks have always done. And then you see it reflected when it's time to vote for the Hall of Fame, when it's time for accolades, when it's time for MVP. So for the people out there who don't understand the power of the media, so when you take the power of these white media figures with these white owners, that explain exactly what you said, why their conduit is just those teams, and you still see it playing out today with the Colin Kaepernick back and forth. Well, with even Lamar Jackson's negotiations, it still is prevalent today how the athlete doesn't have a lot of people we talk to, which is why black sports writers are so important, because in many ways, these black athletes have trusted the black sports writer far more than any of these white sports writers.
Yeah, and I mean, I saw that for sure. Even with somebody like Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, when he did a piece with Black Journal, which was a black television show, public access show, back in the 70s. You get a glimpse into his life. He talks at length with the journalist from that show. So, it's not necessarily that he was aloof to everybody, but he also, understood that his words wouldn't get twisted when he was speaking to, members of his own community. I'm also thinking of, when you mentioned the Hall of Fame, Bill Russell refusing to show up at the unveiling or his induction into the Hall of Fame. And everybody's like, why? Why wouldn't he want to, why isn't he grateful for getting into the Hall of Fame? And, his tactic was to just sort of stay silent about it and let all of the white journalists spin their own narratives about it. And of course, black journalists were like, well, isn't it obvious why he might not be running to, be part of the pomp and circumstance, given the way that they had treated black players, coaches, et cetera, in previous generations. What you were saying earlier, too, about how, one kind of way of being, if it's by a black athlete, is read one way. If a white athlete does it, it's read a completely different way. And one of the things that I found was that when Larry Bird was just coming into the league, he actually didn't really like talking to the media either.
Right.
But instead of reading him as aloof and, stuck up or thinks he's uppity, et cetera, they said, oh, he's just humble. He hasn't let fame change him. He's still the good old boy that we knew from before. And this is all the media that's generating this. Larry Bird wasn't necessarily saying that, but they had created this narrative for him as the humble, unassuming athlete. And of course, the hardworking athlete. That's the other flip side of this, is that black athletes are often seen as folks who don't need to try that hard, because they've got natural talent. So therefore, they're not working that hard, which is completely ridiculous. But again, it's this racialized narrative that continues to show up, decade after decade in sports journalism.
I'm going to go back to Simon Gordine because the reason why, look, I got more than 1,000 books over there. I've read a heck of a whole lot about a lot of people. And to your point, I had no idea about him, no idea about what he did. And it's also a perfect example of how the story is rewritten. because folks, they talk about Larry O'Brien, talk about David Stern, you now go to Adam Silver, and who saved the league and all these different things along those lines. But as you write, the work that he did really played a huge role in the NBA being able to survive that period. How is he honored today? Is there any public recognition of him? Anything?
You know, honestly, when I was doing research on him, the most recent stuff that I could find was his obituary, which is kind of sad. There was also, you know, like a profile here and there. But
Wow.
beyond that, you know, there wasn't much about Simon Gordine. And I, in a lot of cases, we focus so much on the athletes on the floor, and we neglect to focus on, you know, what does the administrative side of this look like? And one of the things that Simon Gordine's story shows us is that folks back in the 70s were having the same kind of conversations about the lack of representation on the business side of sports, whether it was in the front office of teams, whether it was in the league headquarters in New York City, or whether it was in ownership of the actual teams. And so when he got bypassed, you know, in the mid 70s, and they decided to hire Larry O'Brien to become commissioner, in a sense, they were, you know, they passed him over. And folks at the time, especially Black journalists and the players themselves, were kind of like, wait a second, this guy was the heir apparent. He was the deputy commissioner to Walter Kennedy. He had been working with the league for, you know, for years and had the level of experience and also had a good relationship with the players. But he gets passed over for Larry O'Brien. And, you know, there are calls at that point in 1975 to, you know, boycott the league. And Reverend Jesse Jackson, in an article that came out, you know, around the same time, said, look, we need to look at sports, look at the business side of sports, and recognize that there is something called vertical segregation, meaning that the vast number of African Americans involved in the sporting industry are the folks on the court, on the field, et cetera. But the further up the chain you go, especially if you follow the money and you follow the administrative control, it becomes essentially lily white. And so it's amazing that now 50 some years later, we're still having the same conversation.
And again, it is so interesting because I know, matter of fact, I just sent him a text. I mean, I know Mark Tatum, who's the deputy commissioner of the NBA, who's African American, and had no idea that there was a previous deputy commissioner who was Black to him.
No way.
No, I mean, like
that's actually a crime in my eyes.
I absolutely had.
Yeah.
I had no idea. No idea. So that's just one of the things that is just so Gordine, O'Brien comes. Does he stay? Does he go?
Gordine stayed on. He actually stayed on in the league until the early 80s, I want to say. And then he left to go into private industry. But he was around for a long time. He had a long-standing, good relationship with the NBA. He was universally liked by folks, the players, and you know, the administrators. So again, one can't help but see that race was involved in this, and also too, they wanted to hire Larry O'Brien because of his political connections in DC.
Right.
He was the guy who could potentially get them past this whole merger debacle
Mhm.
and get the Sherman antitrust waiver to allow the ABA and the NBA to merge. And that's really what they were hoping. And they worried also at the same time about having a Black commissioner when they were still in the midst of, this protracted labor struggle and legal struggle with the MBPA, which was majority Black.
Kermit Washington. The reason I am very familiar with that story, I'm born and raised in Houston. Grew up a Houston Rockets fan, and everyone remembers that punch, Kermit Washington against Rudy Topjanovich. But you detail how deep and widespread that one punch went when it came to the policing, if you will, and of Black players, but also how it established this notion somehow that all of these players were violent criminals roaming the court looking to knock folks out. I'll sort of laugh at that, considering we're talking about the same people who covered hockey, where fights was just so commonplace, where they were part of the game.
Yeah, and I'm Canadian, so I grew up watching hockey. I grew up watching the brawls, the gloves coming off, the helmets coming off.
Really? You're like, really? I mean, the punch was savage, but it's like, really?
And I mean, the thing is, it wasn't necessarily in the context of a major brawl, right?
Right.
The extant footage of the actual punch and all of the memories leading up to it, show that this was something that was not premeditated.
No,
right?
I remember he ran up to him. I remember he runs up to him, and Washington just wheels around, and I guess sees him in his sort of periphery, and it hits him in the face.
Yeah, but what was so striking about that case was how it, really started all of this discourse. And actually, the discourse had even started before that infamous punch, of Black players who were these big guys. And they kept emphasizing over and over again how big basketball players had gotten, and the fact that this was so dangerous now, and they needed to really clamp down on this fighting because it was just not good for the league. And at the same time, if we're thinking about, a comparison in hockey, this is the time of all-out brawls in the 1970s, and there was very little punishment actually happening in the context of the NHL. But for some reason, in the context of the quote-unquote urban crisis, where it was imagined that young Black men were out of control somehow, and that they had caused all of the troubles of the inner city, right? That somehow there was only one way to read that punch and to read, Black players becoming involved in scuffles on the court, and that was as a criminal act. And that's really the moment when those fines just get bigger and bigger and bigger. Now, I'm not saying that, I want to see fighting all the time on the court. We're certainly not denying that the punch actually happened. But it's interesting how it became racially weaponized against Black players.
But it's not. the reason it's not shocking. Again, it is because what this reminds me of is a so-called, and many times they were lies, a so-called criminal act that literally led to white folks killing scores of Black people. Tulsa, lynchings, other race riots. And so the actions of one Black person then becomes the entire race. And so the reaction is, must clean this mess up. We can look. It repeated itself. Malice in the Palace. It repeated itself in the NBA. And again, I know somebody watching like, why does he keep going back to it? Because I'm trying to explain to people the role of media. Okay, what happened when what happened when David Stern changed the dress code? Right. Oh, we need them coming dressed in suits because they were wearing they're looking too hip hop. The hairstyles. What you've always had are white owners and white media policing black bodies. And when one thing happens, it's emblematic of everybody, and now we must change this, or it's going to somehow just destroy the league and destroy America and destroy civilization. That literally is how it has been framed since 1619.
Mm-hmm. And what was so interesting when you read the black players' comments on the punch and on fighting in the NBA in the late 70s, they're actually the ones who say, look, especially the veteran players who had been in the league even in the 60s, they were like, actually, the league used to be way worse. There used to be way more hatchet men in the league who were always, fouling terribly and, brawling with each other. But the difference was that the sport wasn't as visible then, and the sport wasn't as black then. And so it came to take on all of these meanings that were, echoing this long history of the need in particular to police black male violence or imagined or alleged violence.
I want to talk about style. And the reality is that, look, black folk, we just do stuff different. How we dress, how we talk, how we walk, in terms of what we do, I mean, that's just who we are. African Americans have always been America's trendsetters, and the reality that's why I love your subhead, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, Spencer Haywood, and the generation that saved the soul of the NBA. And the reason I'm bringing that up is because that again was one of the criticisms. Oh, this style of play. Earl the Pearl Monroe. They're bringing that playground stuff into the league. Fast forward to today. The reality is this. The style of blackness, the NBA embraces it. In fact, I'm at the NBA All-Star game this year in Salt Lake. I've been a guest of the NBA for the last several All-Star games, probably going back 7, 8, 9 years. And I'm sitting there, and so during the All-Star game, music is always playing. So because it ain't a real game, all right? It's just really exhibition. And every song is hip hop. Every song. And I think I also heard, and now there are no words, everything is instrumental. But I swear I also heard them playing C Murder's Down for My Ends. And I was like, interesting. And so I find it just fascinating. And again, I go back to David Stern and the dress code and what they didn't want because of the writers like, this is just too hip hop and look how they're looking. And I look at the commercials. I look at who's sitting courtside. I look at who's performing at halftime. Look at all of those things. And the reality is, all of the things these people said they hated about these black ball players, it is on full display today.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we know who won that. We know who won that battle.
Well, 80% of hip hop is bought by white people.
Exactly. Well, and that's one of the things that we have to remember about David Stern was that, whatever else we say about his management style, he understood, having been with the league from the early 1960s, or at least, working as external counsel and then becoming part of NBA administration belatedly, he understood that this league, for better or for worse, from the fans or the team owners' perspectives, was going to be a Black league going forward. And so either they had to lean into that and figure out how to monetize that, or, you know, they wouldn't have anywhere to go. And so at the same time that you have the increasing Blackness of the game on the court, you also have, hip hop becoming more mainstream. And
Mm-hmm.
so, Stern sees an opportunity there to sell to the US public a curated Black aesthetic, one that's exciting to watch on the court, the style, but devoid of any kind of political content, right? And it creates these kinds of boundaries so that when Black players in the next generation, you mentioned Allen Iverson and the like, they come in the mid to late 90s, and they're like, okay, this league will accept Blackness. And so they just are themselves and are repping their culture. And all of a sudden it's too much, right? Because they've gone outside of those carefully crafted boundaries of
It's more like them saying,
acceptable Blackness.
right. And what it is like, okay, we get to decide, it's sort of like a buffet. We want this amount of Blackness. No, I don't want too much Black. Because here's the deal, and this is, and people don't understand this here. Same thing happens on the news side. When you have these networks who want to appeal to Black viewers. But then it's like, oh, no. We said we can't be too Black, because see, then we can't get the white advertising dollars. So they want just a certain amount of Blackness.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I mean, I saw that, you mentioned going to the All-Star game. I went to the All-Star game in 1997 as one of the Raptors dance pack members, because I have a sort of long history with the league myself, having been an NBA dancer from 1996 to 1999.
Mm-hmm.
And so I saw, even from the perspective of, being on the dance team, how much, those boundaries mattered. So when we first started out, back in the, I think I came in the second year that the Toronto Raptors were in existence. And at the time, it was Isaiah Thomas who was the GM. The ownership was sort of changing hands, but it was almost run like a startup. And we were given so much freedom in terms of how we presented ourselves. So much like Iverson, we showed up wearing bandanas. We had, the mechanic suits. We had like the combat boot style, shoes and whatnot. And we danced to, the latest hip hop. Then a few years later, when the team was bought by Maple Leaf Sport and Entertainment, you could sense a real change in the marketing of the team. We ended up at a brand new arena, which was fantastic. But at the same time, it became very clear that as the dance team, as part of this wider show, that we would have to perform a safer image. So we started dancing to Motown, which, hey, I love dancing to Motown, but that was considered safe, family friendly. We would dance to Will Smith, not Busta Rhymes or Biggie Smalls, or, it would be the cleaned up version, or as you said, the instrumental version. And it became very clear that we were catering to the folks who owned the seat licenses on the court, the corporate boxes. Again, mostly a white male audience, rather than repping, hip hop culture in Toronto. Those folks were sitting up in the nosebleeds. And so even from that perspective, I saw how narrow those boundaries were in terms of presenting a certain kind of image to the wider public.
Last question. I ask all authors this, and I always love to hear their answer to this, and that is, what was your wow moment writing this book? Was there one or two? I've had some people say there are 10, 20. What was your, so you're doing the research and you're interviewing people and you're going over things. What was the moment where you went, I call it the wow moment or the oh shit moment, where you like, wow, that is crazy, or I had no idea, something that shocked or stunned you?
Yeah, I mean, I probably, like some of your authors, there are many, many moments where I was like, oh, really? Did they just say that? Did they just print that? I mean, what struck me was the amount of struggle that was ongoing in the league in the early 70s, and it was all Black led. And, I could only include a certain number of stories in the book. I have files of other incidents where players were just refusing to go on the court to contest unfair contracts. So that struck me. On the flip side of that, and I just did a reading for the book in Baltimore, and one of the things that I found in the Larry O'Brien papers was a memo from a league administrator to the NBA office in New York, saying, well, as part of this anti-drug program that they had put together in the early 80s, we should have teams visit maximum security prisons that are nearby. And they said, even though, we're going to pitch it to the player as, part of their community service work, what we really want them to see is just how bad it is in prison. So it was almost like they wanted to scare them straight.
Wow.
By sending them to nearby, like literally, this was something that somebody thought was a good idea. I don't know whether it actually came to fruition at all, but somebody was thinking it. And that was a moment when I was like, whoa, okay, they really do see these players as criminals.
Wow, that is amazing. Well, Theresa, I must say, okay, one last one. So you were a dancer. So was your interest in basketball before you became a dancer? I mean, how did you say you grew up in Canada? And you grew up hockey. It ain't like y'all had a basketball team for a long time.
Well, before
where did your interest in basketball come from?
Well, before Toronto ever had a team, I used to watch the Knicks all the time. So, we still.
My apologies. My apologies.
I know, right? What a team to pick. But I loved basketball growing up, and that was the sport that all the kids of color watched who grew up in Canada. I actually used to skate when I was younger, but I never really was a hockey fan. But I was an athlete. I was also a trained dancer. And so, when I went to graduate school to begin to look at African American history, I was like, I would rather read about, what Black athletes were doing and looking at the racial dynamics of sport than studying other aspects of the history. Because for me, that was just something that I grew up enjoying. I grew up being immersed in. It was just sports 24/7 when I was growing up.
Well, Black Ball, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, Spencer Haywood, and the generation that saved the soul of the NBA. Absolutely fascinating. I hope folks check it out. And it is certainly a side of the NBA and the Black athlete a lot of people may not be aware of. And hopefully they will learn a hell of a lot more. Theresa, we certainly appreciate it. Thanks a lot.
Thanks so much. Thanks for having me.